Hello and welcome to She the People's Women's Writers Fest. My name is Deepshika. I'm here to introduce you to the speakers and the moderator for the second panel today. This panel is titled Changing Face of Children's Writing, and we have with us four awesome children book authors. They are here to talk about their craft, the genre, the challenges of writing children's book and publishing it, and much more. So, without much ado, I'll introduce you all to all of them. First, we have Bijal Vachharajani is not when she's not reading a children's book, she is writing or either editing one. Her books include A Cloud Called Bhura, which won the Author Children's Book Award 2020. So you want to know about the environment and Kitten Trouble are other some of her other books. She's a commissioning editor at Pratham Books. She's also part of Abhiyan Library Movement and is a certified climate warrior. Welcome, Bijal. Next, we have Sonali Shenoy. Sonali Shenoy is a journalist and works for New Indian Express. The Dog Who Taught Me Math was her first children's book. Her latest book is titled What's the Big Secret, which is an illustrated book on periods. She is currently raising two money plants called Oprah and Alan. We also have with us Lavanya Karthik. Lavanya loves making up stories and drawing pictures. She says you can often find her wandering about the bylanes of Mumbai, nibbling on chocolate, chatting with street dogs, and looking for the next book idea. She's the author of several books, including Meal on Wheels, A Walk with Humby, and The Lion's Feast. The Girl Who Loves to Sing, Tejan Bai, and The Boy Who Played with the Light, Satyajit Ray, are her latest works. Ritu Vaishnav is our moderator for the day. She is the author of the best-selling picture book Pink and Blue, as well as Inside a Dark Box, which won the Children's Book of the Year award earlier this year. She's also the co-founder of children's bookstore called Cool School and has been closely involved with children's books as a reader, writer, editor, advisor, bookseller, cheerleader, and parent as far as she can remember. I welcome you all on behalf of She the People and hand over the session to Ritu to moderate.
Thank you, Deepshika. Welcome everybody to this discussion about something that all of us on the panel feel very passionately about. When I was in school, and we had a very good library, but our choices were very limited. We had nothing more than Enid Blyton's and Nancy Drew's, Hardy Boys, classics, and fairy tales. I almost envy the choices that my son has today. The sheer variety and volume that is available to him today. Now, children's literature, or kidlit as we call it, has undergone tremendous change over the last 10 years. And let's dive into this conversation to find out how it has changed, how it is changing, and where it is headed. Sonali, let me start with you. You've just come out with a book that talks about periods. And it has been written from the perspective of an 11-year-old boy. Now, in our school, this conversation was had with us by our biology teacher after all the boys were sent out for an extra games period. I want to know from you, how easy or difficult was it to get a publisher on board for this book?
It was actually a very open, receptive process. When I pitched it to Arpita, my editor at Penguin, she embraced the idea. She thought it was very cool and novel. So it wasn't a struggle at all. And in fact, the journey of writing it is like the fun story here, because we had to sort of break all of the common associations in our minds as adults in order to bring this book together. Like, for instance, it's about periods, but there's no red in the entire book. So we have to sort of break our own existing stereotypes. But it was a great process.
Right. Lavanya, you've had a long journey as a children's writer. Do you think that publishers and audience are more receptive today to ideas that perhaps would not have found backing some 10 years back?
I would say yes, absolutely, because I think we are, in fact, it's right now is a fantastic time to be an author, because publishers are extremely receptive to ideas, new ideas or challenging concepts that you wouldn't have found in Indian books 10 years ago. There are all kinds of topics now that people are talking about. We're talking of social justice, we're talking of climate change, wildlife conservation. There are so many topics that you would be hard pressed to find in books a decade ago. So definitely.
Bijal, you've had front row seats to this as a writer, as a commissioning editor. It's a really exciting time to be in children's literature right now, isn't it? There are over the last 10 years, we've seen a lot of independent publishers coming on the scene. We've seen big publishers taking children's books that much more seriously. We've seen a lot more spaces dedicated exclusively to promoting and selling children's books. There's been a sort of revolution, if we may call it that, in children's in kidlit universe. What do you think has brought about this boom?
Sorry, Ritu, you broke up in the last sentence. Could you repeat that? The last sentence?
I was saying that there is so much that has happened in the kidlit universe over the last 10 years. What do you think has brought about this boom?
That's a great question. And I actually, in 2012, 13, I was doing my master's research on children's literature and environment. And one of the things that I found was that in 2000, the New York Times actually started a separate bestseller list for children's books. And they said it's mostly because of the expected demand for the fourth of the Harry Potter series. And, I remember reading this line which said it takes a wizard to change the course of the times. And I thought it was such a great explanation of how children's book industry suddenly boomed because there were children reading, they were talking about it, there were lines outside bookstores with this one phenomenon. And also in India coincided with a lot of indie publishers setting up shop. At that point, the bookstores, the mainstream bookstores were booming. Today, it's the indie bookstores like yours, for instance, that's actually on to the patent of children's books. But I feel like all of that came together in a way that actually captured children's imagination to get them to read. But to go back to that universe that reading creates. And it coincided with what Lavanya said. Suddenly, publishers were interested in doing more weighty topics, more nuanced topics, and more stories that actually resonated with the Indian child, not just British characters that you see that we grew up with. So I think it was all of that that suddenly brought together this boom. And honestly, I'm really grateful for it because we all get to do what we love, and that's so rare.
Absolutely. I think when we established our store about 10 years back, even in non-fiction, we had this India section. We had fabulous books on Roman history and Greek mythology. And we had this one India section, and every time somebody from the publisher's team would visit us, we would tell them, I don't have enough things in this section. I mean, we're based in India and I have more on Roman history than on Indian history because the books on Indian history are just not interesting enough. So I think over 10 years, I've also seen that mindset shift in India from telling children that you should read because you have to and because it's good for you, and it's shifted to read because it's fun. And I see publishers backing it as well. Lavanya, how do you feel? Do you feel that there's been a change in the audience as well? Do you think you've had to change as a writer over the years to respond to a changing audience?
Actually, I think every author should change. Don't be a static writer. I think one should change. But yes, there has been a change. I think it's not just the market, exposure to books from different parts of the world. I think there's also changing. There's an increasing acknowledgement of children as independent readers. I think kids are getting more agency in India as well as readers, making their own choices, as having their own taste and interest in topics, not something that we give to them as adults or we tell them what to read through recommended guides. I think that has been a very that's been a sea change. I think the acknowledgement that children are they have agency in what they're reading and needing to address topics because they're not just not to address them as dumbed down or juvenile audiences, but to acknowledge that they're intelligent, they're discerning readers, and that changes the way we write as well. It's a constant
And I
challenge.
think we're all making an effort to make it fun for children, biographies or history, even serious topics. There is this consciousness that they have to be made fun for children. We just don't have to, dump it on them and tell them this is good for you, read it. So now two areas that I know writers and publishers are consciously focusing on today. is diversity and busting gender stereotypes. We are seeing this consciousness across writers, across publishers. When you submit manuscript, there is a conscious thought going into whether your characters are adhering to gender stereotypes or whether they're deviating from the gender stereotypes. How important do you think this is, especially when it comes to children's books? Sonali?
Yeah, I think busting gender stereotypes is so important, as everyone would agree. I want to just add to what Lavanya said. She spoke about agency. And I think that the moment that you put the focus on agency of the individual, you're not focusing on a stereotype anymore. For instance, I have a friend whose niece is about 4, and she loves dinosaurs. And she can name like more dinosaurs than all the adults that I know who watched all of the Jurassic Park movies. Real tongue twisters. And there's no filter as to whether it's boy girl. Does she want to be a paleontologist someday? It's just like that's her interest, and her parents are feeding her with more of that information. So I think if we focus on interests, as opposed to our own associations as adults, that's automatically going to happen. And we won't really have these stereotypes. In terms of the material, I think that if we have plot lines around how, as we grow into our bodies and learn more about our genders, how we sort of complement one another as opposed to compete, or as opposed to put boys and girls in boxes, I think that would really make a huge change in the years to come, and as adults who read these books as children.
Lavanya, have you as a writer also observed that when publishers, or when you submit your manuscript, or when you discuss ideas with publishers, you've also seen this growing consciousness that we need more stories that show more diverse characters, that tell diverse stories, that bust gender stereotypes? Are you seeing this increase in consciousness?
Absolutely. There is definitely, in the last decade, there has been a growing acknowledgement in the Indian kidlet world of having diversity, diverse stories, own voices. That has been a major a change, and also a challenge for the Indian given our enormous diversity, given just how different we are, and the sheer number of groups and communities that one needs to bring to the forefront in writing. So yes, there has been a change. Even the way we present books. I think a decade ago, I'm not sure. A mixed up book, a graphic novel, come regular novel like Ninja Nani would have even been accepted by publishers or even in an audience. I'm not sure if people would have been able to understand a book that just merges illustrations and comics and is just bizarre and zany. I think just the changing nature of our audience is definitely being mirrored in the way the kind of books we're creating now.
Absolutely. I think humor is something that has become very big ever since the Wimpy Kid series happened. So everybody it's made everybody realize that children want more humor in their books, and that's something that sells, and that's something that really connects with children. So there's a lot of focus on that as well. Bijal, children have far greater access today even to international titles, right? So when we put our books out there, they're not just competing for space and attention with other Indian children's books. We're also competing with Percy Jacksons and Harry Potters and Wimpy Kids and Roald Dahls. Children have access to all of this. How well do you think our books are competing with these, and where do you feel that there is need to grow?
I feel like there's been such a sea change in Indian children's publishing as you said, over the last 10 years. And every time there's a new Percy Jackson out, which unfortunately there aren't going to be many more of the universe. But every time it comes out, I'm excited. So I totally understand a child being excited. But I think what's happening is that we're seeing more and more braver stories. We're seeing more stories that push boundaries. For instance, I sat and read Lavanya's Ninja Nani 1, 2, 3 all together, one after the other. And I was just amazed by how refreshing the story is because it's just great, mad fun. So I feel like we are seeing all of these happening, and there are books that definitely stand right by these international titles, and they're refreshingly very, very local, very contextual. I do think that the problem is getting the word out to the audience. And for instance, I think the Hook books by PRH has been such a great way of bridging a much needed gap. They're very, very local, but there's a very there's an ease to reading them. They're great fun. They're great for reluctant readers also. So I think that we're experimenting, and as long as we have that space to experiment, we're definitely sitting right there. But actually, I should ask you that: do you see readers coming and picking up a Percy Jackson as well as say homework or Sonali's book in the same way?
So, see, homework and hook books and Percy Jackson cater to two different age groups, right?
Of
What
course.
I do see is that there is a lot more that's coming out for younger children that is attractive. There are some fabulous picture books being done. I mean, Pratham, of course, is adding a lot of color to their books. Pickle York books, for instance, my God, I mean, Darkless. I that book would not be out of place in say a Walker catalog. It would be perfectly it would perfectly suit any international catalog. So there is Art First that is doing some brilliant books on Indian art as well. Their latest book with all the paper engineering and all is fabulous in terms of design, right? So it is very exciting what publishers are doing. But I feel, so even with hook books, there is this attempt to tell fun stories in easier language, adding more color, adding more design. And I think these get picked up. They're a huge hit. I think where we struggle is the Percy Jackson age group because I feel the design element is not as exciting for that age group right now as it could be. So when you look at middle grade reads or when you look at young adult reads, children read later. First, they have to find the cover attractive enough to pick and read more about the book, and I think that's somewhere where we're still losing out. So that's what I feel. Lavanya, you want to weigh in on this conversation?
Actually, no. I think you are a far better judge of the way kids are reading and what they're reading right now. I would defer to you any day.
All right. No, I think, Sonali, do you think as a reader, when you pick up children's books, do you feel that there are areas where we need to improve, before we can match up to, say, some of the more attractive international titles? Because our sales are definitely, we are a much smaller universe as compared to the international kidlit universe, and we're growing. It's an exciting space, but we're still really, really tiny. Do you think, in what ways do you think we can improve to make our books more attractive, at least in the first stage? Because the stories are all great, the content is there, but there is a challenge. First, you have to get a kid to pick up the book, right, and read about it.
Yeah.
What do you think we can do?
Yeah, completely. I completely get what you're saying about how the cover needs to sort of excite, and that can be your hook. That was a big one for me when we created this book, because when you're talking about menstruation and you want a little boy to pick it up as well, like what do we put on the cover? So we put a paper plane that is also a sanitary napkin, um, and it's blue because we wanted boys to also associate it, think that it was cool. So I think that we want to like think about what our target audience would consider cool, would consider. I think when you're also in middle school, you're thinking about things like popularity. So I think you want to really get into the mind of a kid. And I think it would also be exciting. Something that I'm not seeing in books right now is a reflection of our present day things like Instagram, texting, emojis. So I think if we add pops of those things, um, whether it's in the inside on the cover, I think that it's going to be a lot more reflective of what is going on, what kids are up to right now.
All right, so one common question to all of you. Going forward, what more would you like to see from children's writers and publishers? You specifically, what more would you like to see? Vijal, let's start with you.
Um, so, I'll say this as both as an editor, as an author, I definitely think we're missing climate fiction hugely in India. It's the Greta Thunberg effect has taken over the world, but we're just not looking at climate stories seriously here. So I would love to see that. I'd also love to see more fun young adult books because I kind of think that the moment we think young adult, we want to put in more serious stuff, more angsty stuff. Angst is part of it, but I think I'd love to see more books that actually are just fun to read, that are an escape. Definitely more graphic novels. And I think one of the things that I'd love to see more is more lived experiences, more authors writing their own diverse stories and, not being appropriated by others. So that's like a long wish list. But and yes, one last thing, I want to see more talking animals in middle grade. I think they just disappeared from our um, vocabulary. Lavanya, I'm looking at you for that.
Lavanya, what more would you like to see?
Oh, actually, everything that Bijal said, and I would like to see edgier books. Books that are more experimental. They just. I just like to see a lot of crazy stuff happening in books. Comics, uh, unreliable narrators. I love books where you cannot really trust the person telling you the story. So I'd like to see that across genres. Picture books as well. Picture books, middle grade, YA, of course. I would like to see a lot more edgier. Eccentric topics addressed across all these genres, from the earliest readers to the older ones. And I would really personally, in picture books, I have all these. I would really like to see more wordless picture books now. I think we are at a stage where we've understood that our younger readers are perfectly capable of understanding complex narratives, of reading visual cues. So wordless picture books is something that really excites me, and I would love to see more of those. And you know who knows, wordless picture books for everyone, young adults, middle grade. Let's just push the envelope on all of these. So in a word, edgier books and lots
All
more.
right. Sonali, what about you?
Yeah, I the last eccentric title that I saw was a book called "The Bum Who Ran Away." It's about kids, and basically when they wake up in the morning, they discover that their bum has run away, and then there's an army of bums. And I didn't get to the end, but it definitely caught my attention. So I think books that are eccentric are amazing and will definitely make more kids curious and read. But if I were to think about a gap in the publishing world that I'd like to see more narratives and plot lines around, it would be subject lines that sort of affect you growing up as an adult and you're not really sure what to do with, that you could learn from as a child, that you could learn from in your environment but often don't, like boundaries, for instance, or how to argue with someone without hurting their feelings. These gray areas that sort of fall within the cracks, and if you have good role models around you, you're like, okay, you just pick up on it without realizing it. But if you don't, very often you grow up as an adult and you don't really know what to do with these situations. Confrontation, I'm just learning that one. I think if we have narratives that weave these elements, these aspects of real life and life skills into the storylines, then that can really help leaps and bounds.
Life skills. And if I may add to that, I would love to see a lot more fun Hindi books. Fun books in regional languages where the manuscript is actually submitted in that language. They have fun with the language, not just a translation. That's something that I find missing. And I think Iktara and Iklavya are doing a fabulous job of filling that gap. But I would love to see more of that. All right. If we have some questions from the audience, we'll take that before I come to a final question to all of you. Do you think writers writing for children need to update themselves continuously with what interests kids, since we are living in an age where everything is changing quickly for them? Bijal, would you like to take that?
I definitely think it's good to know your audience and not to assume that you know your audience, because children are perhaps the smartest readers that you can have. And so if you're just going to make assumptions that this is what they like because I thought this worked when I was a child, I think that might be problematic. So definitely, yes, you need to stay in touch with things, but this also I feel like childhood's a very universal experience in some ways. Certain things will never change, like, your first period, losing your tooth, bullying, going to a new school. There's some experiences that are just universal. They're also pretty much part of growing up. So I think, and for me, I feel like it's a balance. Also, one of the things is also just to be cool. Adding stuff doesn't work because children catch on and then they're thinking, oh no, this old person is telling us how we talk, which becomes a problem.
Preaching does not work.
Yes, not at all. So I would say it's you need to definitely know what the tools they use, what is cool for them, but you also need to go back to the feeling of being a child more important than anything else.
Right. Okay. Next question, if you can have that on the screen. Do you think authors should go more by what is interesting, or they should write about what's more important, even if it's not that interesting? Lavanya?
I would say write the story you want to read. I say interest. I think your story is most authentic, most original when you are true to the story. You are writing about your experiences about something, and it's your job to make it interesting. I think finally, as a writer, that is your entire job from page one to the end. It's your job to make it interesting. So for a writer, everything should be of interest. And
And interesting and fun is important as well. Fun is not important.
fun, sure. I think I would also say that there are a lot of topics that do not require a fun element. I mean, you can address very grim topics and in a very grim tone. I think that kids
But
do
still make it interesting.
understand. Yeah, interesting, of course,
Yeah.
and to show that there is depth in them. I think the second you start talking down to children, you assume you know it, or you are attempting to write in a voice that is really not authentic. Kids catch on at once. I think you've lost your audience on page one. The second you're trying to, when the artifice is obvious. So write the book that is most authentic to you. I think you're the best judge, and write to the child that you once were, perhaps, or you still are, and that perhaps will make the most interesting book.
Write about what you feel strongly about.
True. Yeah.
How do writers understand the psyche of children, Sonali?
Because well, personally for me, I don't feel fully grown up yet. I feel like I'm still very much a child in some ways. But I think you understand the psyche of a child because you were a child, and you go back to your childhood and you remember all of your firsts, and that's how you pick stories that are personal to you, and that will be relatable because, like Vijal said, because so many experiences, they're individual but they're universal because everyone has them. So yeah, that would be
For
my
instance,
answer.
the
But
book
also
that
to the I
sorry,
was going to say to the previous question as well, because I had some thoughts the moment it popped up on the screen. Was the question was, do you want to pick a topic that's interesting or important, and almost like they're one versus the other. I can't make that association. How can anything that's important not be interesting?
absolutely.
Like if it is important, that means that it's on the forefront of your mind, which means it's taking up real estate in your brain, which makes it automatically something you're thinking about, and you find a way to make it interesting. Usually if it's something you're not thinking about or that's not important, you're going to sort of shove it under the rug. But yeah, lead with curiosity. So important for all topics as opposed to preach. Yeah.
Right. Okay. Another question. How to introduce social issues and other sensitive topics to children through writing? Bijal?
I think Lavanya did pretty much answer that question because when you start with the story, you start with this is something Anushka Ravi Shankar had said once. She said you start with a question. For instance, when I started writing a cloud called Bura, which is about climate change, I didn't start with a question about climate change, but I started with a question: what if this big brown cloud comes and hovers on top of Mumbai? And from that, it became a story of many other things. So I think when you're thinking of sensitive topics, and today we see a lot of that, your books, Ritu, tackles so many nuanced topics and weighty issues. Um, but I think you first have to step back from that topic and ask yourself, what are the questions I want to address in this story? And then you kind of approach it, because the first thing that needs to come is the story. Any messaging and any topics, there will be themes, there will be nuances, but first thing is always the story, I think.
And you answer that question from the perspective of a writer. And from the perspective of a parent, I would like to add that it really helps if you can find a book which is age appropriate and introduces that subject, which is how Pink and Blue happened, because I wanted to discuss gender stereotypes with my 2-year-old who was coming across these stereotypes in play school. And I could not find one that would discuss it with a 2-year-old. So, one felt the need to write it. So, if you can find the right book, and these topics are being covered extensively today, I think that makes the job much easier. We have one last question that we'll take, if we can have that on the screen. What kind of research work goes in understanding the kind of writing children will like? And I'll pose that question to all three of you. What kind of research work goes in understanding what kids will like, for all of you? So, Sonali, let's start with you.
I am a baby myself in the game of children's writing. I'm 2 books old, so my
For this
biggest
particular
research, yeah, for this particular book, and for the one I wrote prior to this, for this particular book, it was just going into my own childhood memories. That was honestly the biggest. It was going into my own childhood memories because it was an incident that happened to me. There was a little boy who came up to me, and when I was like 11 or 12, and said what are pads used for. And when I was pitching the book, I remembered that story, and but of course I remembered it as an adult. So when I went back to those memories, and then I asked different people about their own, I asked various boys about when they'd learned about menstruation, who had told them, etc. But to understand things from a child's perspective, my favorite part about having book be published is getting different opinions. But I don't know, I'm actually going to look at all of you and say, how do you, because I don't have kids, and that would be actually really exciting to be around a lot of kids and get them to look at your drafts.
Lavanya, what sort of research do you put in before you?
Well, first I'd say read widely, read everything, and by that I mean entirely just read uh, middle grade and why. That's pretty much all I read most days. I think the second, I mean, it's parallel. It's not entirely a research question, but you take an angle with your story when you say this is the topic, be it a Ninja Nani caper or be it a biography like my new series. I think the central question is, so what? If this is a child, as a 6-year-old, you want to explain to them about this, Tijan Bai or Satyajit Ray. What is it about a person of that, of course, as adults, we know why they are great. But for a 6-year-old, so what? I think that's the angle I take, which is when you start to look at the childhoods, for instance, of those people. What were they like as children? What is relatable about someone that famous as an adult to a 6-year-old reader who's, not very fluent perhaps with, of course, does not have a very great vocabulary. So when I look at research for a book like that, I look at the childhoods. What were they like as people? What were their families like? What happened to them as kids? What was central to their, what turned them towards the greatness that they went on to achieve? That's one aspect. And like I said, read what your kids are reading. Look at what kids are reading without judgment. For instance, there is this, as parents, we tend to say, don't read comics, don't read fan fiction, don't write fan fiction. But when you look without judgment at the kind of writing that evolves, or the kind of thoughts and feelings that arise in kids from being able to freely read those books, there's a lot to learn from that. So just look at what kids are reading around you.
Right. And Bijal, what sort of research do you put in, and what sort of research do you advise your authors to put in?
I do so because a lot of my fiction and my is based on fact, and also my non-fiction is pretty much all environment. I research so much. I study the topic. I have like buckets of notes before I actually even start working on my book. I talk to children a lot, and that's a part of being a children's author, that you're out there talking to children, and half the time I'm making mental notes saying what did they say, how did they react to certain things. I also don't have children, Sonali, so this is they're all my wonderful test subjects in that sense, because you just get so much to learn just observing them playing with each other, fighting with each other. And one of the things that I strongly believe is that children are, that's something Rachel Carson said. She said children are born with this inherent sense of wonder about the world. And I kind of feel that whatever way you choose to interpret your research, you need to put that at the center of it. Yes, they have lots of information at the fingertips today, but how do you tell them something phenomenal? Like, I still go to schools and the children will be like, do we still drink water the dinosaurs used to drink? Mind blown. So just remember that, and I think you're on the right track.
And I think having a child also helps, because my son is my guinea pig for all my stories, and for a lot of picture books that when we decide what we are going to put at the store and what would work and what would not work. I think he's been the guinea pig for most picture books. All right, so I'm told that we're almost out of time. One final question again that I want all of you to think and tell me. How do you think the audience watching right now, the parents, the children, how do you think they can contribute towards supporting children's books and writing in India? What is it that they can do? Lavanya?
Well, I would say let your kids read what they find interesting. And of course, guide them gently towards the sections in bookstores where there are Indian books. But most of all, let kids read whatever they want. Read what their friends are reading, perhaps not read at all. But I think just let children have the agency to choose what they're reading for themselves.
Sonali?
I think two things. One is because this is being streamed live, like please add in the comments, what stories resonate with you and you haven't read yet, haven't found in a book. I think that's a big way that the audience can contribute. And another one is, it would be really interesting for you to sit down with your child. And I remember my dad did this with me. I had no interest in Secret 7 or Famous 5 or reading, but he took me back to his days, and he sort of brought the sentiment around what reading was like for him. So he told me about how he would sit in school, Don Bosco, like where exactly he ate his lunch. There was a particular eagle that would come and steal his lunch, and then he would read his book. He would also read in school, like with the book on top of his textbook, and he sort of broadened that sentiment, and it made me want to read because of that. And that's what got me hooked, as opposed to the subject material itself. So I think weaving in stories of your parents, their childhood, the nostalgia that comes with it, plays a huge role.
Vijal?
I mean, in full agreement with both Lavanya and Sonali, but I want to add two things. One is that the power of reading aloud with your children is so untapped. Even when they get older, read with them, read aloud with them, because that really helps them keep the reading habit. And the second is, don't make reading a chore, because the moment it becomes homework, the moment it becomes having to do something with it, or having to do something worthwhile with it at the end of the day, you're going to see them running faster than anything else. So just keep reading fun, because that's what it needs to be.
And there are just two things that I would like to add as well, specifically with regards to Indian children's literature. Firstly, experiment with authors that you don't know. Give different books, give different topics, give different authors a chance. Don't straight away go to the best-selling section. Don't straight away go for the author that you know the best. Explore both. And secondly, give feedback. I think all authors love feedback, and we need feedback. So I think those are two things that the audience can do really to help the writers. And on that note, thank you so much, all of you, Bijal, Sonali, Lavanya, and the audience for joining in. And I can promise you, Kidlit is going to be a very exciting space for at least another 10 years. So do keep a watch. Thank you, everybody.
Thank you.
Thank